The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world, and I have news. Gaia just got a whole lot better. They're rolling out all new series and member benefits for 2019. Get your first 2 weeks of Gaia for only 99 cents by going to Gaia.com/Jim and signing up. That's Gaia.com/Jim. Thanks, Gaia.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. So glad to be with you once again. And today I think we're going to have a fascinating discussion. I know there are many animal lovers out there. I'm an animal lover and have a couple of dogs, Rambo and Teddy. And I always look at them and you almost feel like you're communicating telepathically. Now, the skeptics out there might say, well, geez, there's nothing to this. They're just animals. They're here when they're here. You've built up a bond because you feed them. But I think there is so much more to it than that. And we're going to talk to a great guest today about that idea. She has a recent book out. It is called Soul Dog, A Journey into the Spiritual Life of Animals. I'm talking about Elena Mannes, and she has a very distinguished background. She's an award-winning independent documentary director, writer, producer, whose honors include 6 Emmy Awards, a George Foster Peabody Award, 2 Directors Guilds of America Awards, and 9 Cine Golden Eagles. She has written, directed, and produced series and documentaries for CBS, PBS, ABC, and the Discovery Channel, including The Amazing Animal Mind and the PBS primetime special, The Music Instinct. She lives in New York City, and we're so pleased to have her with us today. Elena, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Very good to be with you. So what inspired you to write this book? Have you been a lifelong lover of dogs, or is this something that came to you later in life? How has your journey gone with man's best and woman's best friend?
Well, I mean, I have loved animals all my life, but initially, we had family cats as pets, and I didn't really think of them as pets as sort of around to bring us comfort and that unconditional love, and but more or less under human control and sort of not exactly equal to us. And I had no experience at all with dogs. We'd never had a dog, but I was going through, I guess, sort of a midlife crisis. Was in a near fatal car crash on a film shoot.
Oh my.
And it was sort of a wake-up call, and I thought that, there should be more to my life than just working so hard and getting into car crashes, and it came to me that I should get a puppy, which most of my friends thought was an insane idea, as I was traveling all the time and really had no time to deal with a puppy or experience, but I could be stubborn, and once I had this in my head, I mean, I was terrified, I have to say, but somehow I went ahead with it, and I got a black standard poodle puppy. My family had friends who had poodles, so I thought that I would like that, and they're very smart. So I brought this puppy home. His name, the name I gave him was Brio, which in classical music means joy or spirit or gusto, which turned out to be very appropriate. But I really had expected that I would get dog trainers and everything would be sort of under control and my life wasn't really going to change much at all, which quickly proved not to be true. The trainers helped, but I really felt that I didn't understand the puppy. I felt he didn't like me because he didn't obey me. He didn't listen to me. He was very independent-minded, and I was just becoming really frustrated and even desperate that, this was not the relationship that I'd had in mind, and I didn't really know what to do. And one time, he ran away from me in the park in the city, and I was walking backwards, calling him, screaming at him, and I inadvertently stepped over the edge of a boat pond and fell into the water, which was humiliating. But it was sort of a metaphor for my feelings at the time that I'd stepped over the edge and things were totally out of control and I just didn't know what to do. So as a journalist, I had heard, I guess, about these people who called themselves animal psychics or communicators who could understand what animals are thinking and feeling. And I didn't really believe that, but I was curious and I thought, well, I'll give it a shot and see what happens. So I did a little research and found somebody who presumably had a good reputation on the West Coast and called her up and asked her to read Brio, my puppy. And it turned out to be an amazingly accurate report of where we lived from Brio's perspective, how he navigated around the furniture and what windows he liked and what streets he liked in the neighborhood and things about me even that were accurate and about his personality. And there's no way the communicator, the psychic, could have known these things because I didn't tell her anything except for Brio's name and breed. So that was, I wasn't really a believer at that point, but I was definitely more curious and curious enough to keep researching, as I called it, and calling some other psychics to see if they would agree with the first. And generally they were consistent. So this is how this amazing journey that I would end up taking of exploration of the world of animal psychics and even mediums who communicate with beings after death. Eventually I would get to that. And it was a amazing journey and also an inward journey for me, changing my perspective about many, many things about myself and about the nature of the universe even, all because of the dog. So it was a remarkable journey and I felt that I wanted to write about it.
Now, you in the book, you describe yourself initially as a skeptic. Why? Now, the typical skeptic, I would think, would not make that leap to, okay, I'm a skeptic. I have this somewhat unruly dog that won't yield to my command. I'm going to find a pet psychic. Why did you decide to make that step towards a huge paradigm shift?
Well, I don't know that I have the answer to that. And maybe sort of deep down, I was intrigued by this or had some, sort of buried belief in other dimensions beyond what's visible to our five senses, beyond the material world. I mean, as a young child, I had kind of believed in reincarnation, but my parents sort of poo-pooed that. And, so maybe, it was in me all along and I kind of blocked out this tendency towards seeking, to learn more about, some other dimensions of existence or awareness. That's possible. I mean, it is, you're right, it's a little strange looking back on it because I was totally trained professionally to be a skeptic and,
Sure.
and seek empirical evidence and, that's what I thought I believed in.
Now, when the animal psychic communicated with Brio, why weren't you and Brio hitting it off according to Brio at the beginning? Why was he resisting you and not being more loving or not being more obedient? What did he come back with?
Well, I think he was very independent-minded, and he was there, I now believe, to, not to, be at my beck and call, but to lead me, really, to be my teacher. I truly believe at the end of the day that that's why he came into my life. I mean, he just had an amazing wisdom, as I would come to discover, that, I think he was always in touch with this other dimension, if you will. Other people felt it in him somehow. I called it a presence. It was hard to describe, but you could look in his eyes and just feel that he knew a lot of things that I certainly, in the early stages of this relationship, didn't know. I think that he somehow knew that he was there to lead me, not the other way around.
So you go to the psychic, they give you this information. about Brio, and Brio says, this is the way I walk around my home. This is where we live. It gives all this information. So you're probably looking at this as a natural skeptic, kind of a little startled. Where do you go from there? Where do you take it from there?
Well, as I said, I did, call a few other psychics for readings of Brio, and they turned out to be pretty consistent with the first. And then I was working for one of the major networks at the time, and there were a couple of stories that I did. I decided to use my job to sort of further this quote-unquote research that I was doing and my curiosity. So the first story was a documentary called The Amazing Animal Mind. I was working with Diane Sawyer. This was at ABC, and I decided to include a section of that program looking at animal telepathy. So we flew the psychic who had originally read Brio to New York, and she met Diane's dog, a Gordon Setter, in a hotel suite and retired privately to the bedroom for about an hour and came out and gave a report, and it was amazingly accurate. For example, excuse me, she said that he felt dizzy sometimes, and he felt he was spinning and he was scared. And Diane did confirm that he had fallen into a swimming pool as a puppy, which was interesting and really validating. And then another thing I'd done for the story was to tape the dog without the psychic or Diane there at her home in the yard and observing what he did, walking among some trees and down by a stream, and then also inside our house, what rooms he went into and how he went around the furniture. And then later I interviewed the psychic and asked her to describe what the dog did at his home, both inside and outside, and running the tape against what the psychic said. It was right on. I mean, she described that he walked among the trees and went down by a stream and went around under the dining room furniture, and we had all that on tape, so that was pretty validating.
Indeed. So as you continue your journey with Brio, did he start to warm up to you? Did you guys start to develop maybe a better relationship?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I really would put it, not that he was warming up to me. I mean, I think he was ready all along for this connection. I wasn't. But when I learned to really listen to him more and to seek that connection, I think that's when, this amazing bond, really, the glue stuck. It was the most important relationship in my life, really. I mean, he taught me so many things. I mean, he was not healthy all of his life, but I mean, I could go on forever about how he taught me, about stoicism, and he never complained. I mean, he always had this incredible spirit, even at one point where he couldn't really walk. It was a neurological condition, apparently. He somehow his spirit never faded. It was always there, and the messages, the relationship with the communicators translating, for me, for Brio, the messages were so accurate about what I was going through at certain points in my life, and Brio's understanding of that. I mean, there's no way the communicators, these psychics, could have known the details like that of what was going on, and I became so increasingly convinced that, he was incredibly connected to me. I mean, it was like, it's a cliche to say a soulmate, but I mean, that really is what it is. I mean, I felt he knew me. I mean, I just felt when I looked at him, he knew exactly who I was and what was going on with me.
Now, did you, throughout Brio's life here on Earth, did you continue to work with him through the animal communicator, or did you start to do this back and forth directly with him?
Well, both. I mean, I'm not an animal communicator. I would never, even today, it's not a skill that I have to that degree, but certainly over time I became able to, connect with him more directly. And even after he passed, even more I would say it increased my ability to connect with him directly after he passed. The connection became strengthened even, so I by that time I'd really begun a sort of spiritual journey of my own. I've meditated more, and in meditation he comes to me. I can just feel his presence. It's it's an experience that when you have that connection, it, but it's hard to describe to somebody else. But certainly through his physical life in the beginning, I did rely on the communicators a lot to validate this connection and to prove to me that it really was real. I was connected to Brio in his consciousness and spirit.
At the beginning, what did Brio say about you, and how did that evolve and change over the years?
Well, many things, I guess. He would, sometimes there were details about difficult situations I was going through, say at work or financially, and, he would, I guess, sort of validate in a way feelings that I had about somebody I was dealing with, or I think the headline was he led me to trust my own intuition more, to sort of overcome guilt and shame, if you will, and some things that were troubling me in my own life. I never questioned his confidence in me somehow. It sounds strange to say. I know that a dog could, change one's internal psyche in this way that he did.
Now, there may be people out there, and there are all types of people who listen to these programs from, I guess, on one end, what we would call true believers, people who have some level of belief. And then I'm sure there's going to be some people saying, Elena, I'm sure Brio was a beautiful dog and a great companion, but you've convinced yourself of this. Why do you think that perspective would be wrong?
Well, I understand it. I was like that myself once. And frankly, my goal is not to force people to believe the validity of my experience, but it has been my experience, and I know the truth of it. And ultimately, it doesn't matter to me if people accept it as true or not, because, I know the truth of it. I do hope the book might open people's minds to considering at the very least that dogs are not our slaves or other fellow creatures, that they're not here to be at our beck and call and serve us. They're feeling sentient beings, and they're at least our equals, and in some ways our superiors in some regards. And one of the aspects of the book that I did do research into some of the current science into animal cognition and emotion and paranormal abilities, extrasensory abilities, and there's fascinating scientific support that's growing and growing. Granted, it's not mainstream yet, but hard scientists, like neuroscientists and neurologists, are really doing research that's supporting, certainly the fact that dogs and other non-human animals have consciousness. It used to be thought that was only a human trait, but consciousness or awareness. And so it's not, this whole idea of interspecies communication also is not so far out as it used to be thought. I talked to serious researchers, for example, a dolphin researcher who and others who are convinced that the creatures they work with have telepathic abilities and communicate telepathically, but many of them are not willing to say that publicly yet for fear of jeopardizing their scientific credentials. So, I guess I would hope the book maybe opens some minds to possibilities that people haven't considered at the very least, and certainly encouraging people to treat our fellow creatures with respect and to listen to them. And I think that dogs and other non-human animals want us to listen. They want to communicate.
Now, certainly we as humans have thoughts about dogs. what do dogs think of humans? I'm not talking about one specific person like in your case, but in general, according to the animal communicators, what do dogs say about mankind in general? Did you do any research on that end?
Well, I mean, certainly I think they want to communicate with us. I mean, dogs in particular have evolved alongside humans over centuries, so they're wired to seek that connection with humans even more than maybe other non-human animals. But I mean, it's hard for me to say that there's an overall statement that I learned that, other animals have about humans, except, I mean, I think that would be the headline for me, that, they watch us and they want to figure us out, and they want to have that connection with us. Certainly dogs do, and other creatures as well.
We're talking to Elena Mannes. Her book is Soul Dog, A Journey into the Spiritual Life of Animals, and we'll be back on the Paranormal Podcast right after this. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. And I have exciting news, my friends. I've been telling you how great Gaia is for years, but Gaia just got a whole lot better. Now, Gaia remains a video streaming service for people like us who love the 40 and the metaphysical, the unexplained. But Gaia is upping its game for 2019, yes indeed. First, there are all new shows and all new seasons only on Gaia. And there's also Gaia's live stream access to watch and participate from anywhere in the world. And finally, Gaia is rolling out all new member benefits, including discounted tickets to live events, workshops, and exclusive interviews. Now, maybe you got a new device this past holiday season. Well, then I have great news. You can watch Gaia on all of those devices. There's Apple TV, your iPhone, your iPad, your Fire TV, your Roku, your Android device, your computer. If you're listening to this podcast, you can indeed watch Gaia. And Gaia has a community of over 500,000 members, and it's growing every day. Here's some of the great programming you're missing if you're not a member. Mystery Teachings with Teresa Bullard. Teresa explains that our universe may be just one reality in a vast sea of universes. Compare the scientific and metaphysical explanations of the complex geometric and fractal expressions of our universe. Or perhaps Demanhar, Journey Through Time. They talk about time packages. The thought is that in a blink of a divine eye, all things are possible, bundled in discrete packages of time. I've never heard it described that way, and I can't wait to watch that. Or perhaps you might want to join Randy Weitenheimer and Emery Smith. They talk about untapped superhuman capabilities on Undisclosed. They say we are far more capable of achieving fantastic feats than we may believe. Randy and Emery explore various ways within special access programs and spiritual practices to enhance our natural superhuman abilities. Fascinating stuff. Now that's just a tiny, tiny bit of what you get with Gaia, and you can't get it anywhere else. And you can't get it unless you're a member. So go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim. And over there, we've picked some shows featuring guests like John D'Souza and Lauren Coleman. And you can watch that for free. It's so cool the way they set it up. You can see those videos. You don't have to give your email address or anything. And then you can see Jim is right. Gaia is great. It's 100% ad-free and also user-supported. So it's absolutely worth 99 cents to try it out for 2 weeks. It is a no-brainer. So please navigate over to Gaia.com/Jim. Check out those free shows and then sign up with that great deal. Go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. I love it. You'll love it. Thanks, Gaia. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is Elena Mannes. The book is Soul Dog, A Journey into the Spiritual Life of Animals. Now, I found it amazing when you said that Brio had knowledge or maybe thoughts on people you interacted with, maybe worked with, and those kind of things. So were these only people he met, or was he able to somehow telepathically travel? I mean, how did that work? What was the mechanism of that? Because I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Well, the question is, okay, Brio said, okay, coworker X. Yeah, I think that's a really great person, or maybe that's someone you ought to watch out for. Are these people he actually came into contact with, or okay?
No, I mean, it was,
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one could argue that he was reading my mind or my reaction to this person. I mean, there's no way the communicator could have known, and they certainly didn't know these people either. But, I actually played the devil's advocate a lot with the communicators, and I would say, how do you know you're not reading my mind, or this is not Brio, this is you reading my mind? And, they said, I mean, it's true that communicators do rely to some degree on the connection between the person, I hate the word owner, but the dogs or cats, human, on the strength of that connection to do what they do to connect with the dog. But they said, for the most part, they're getting the dogs or the cat's perspective, not the humans. They're seeing or feeling things from the animal's perspective, not the humans. So over time, I came to believe the truth of that because, sometimes they would say things coming from Brio. They said that, those certainly were not in my mind, certainly not consciously, or even that I was aware of or thinking of. So, there's certainly elements of mystery, this whole thing that I don't claim to totally understand. And I've reached the point where, I'm still curious. I want to know more, but, I may never be able to explain this whole phenomenon entirely, but I'm certainly curious, and I certainly believe the fundamental truth that I am and was connected to Brio through something that doesn't exist in the realm of the material world of the human five senses.
That's interesting. In the book, you talk about a kind of change in your journey. You had worked with animal communicators and so forth, but then Brio got quite sick and became almost where he couldn't move, and you had taken him to the vet and so forth, and you hadn't even thought to reach out to an animal communicator, and then you did. And you said this was a major shift or a part of your evolution with Brio. Can you talk about that experience a little bit?
Sure. I mean, he was only 8 when this happened, and he suddenly collapsed and couldn't walk at all. And, I went through a battery of tests, Western medicine, and I would, I just like to say, I would never say, don't go to a Western medically trained vet. I certainly did and still do. But, went through every possible test, heart, cardiology, orthopedics, neurology, and eventually they said that, he had a neurological condition, something wrong with his spine, that he would never walk again, probably normally, much less run. So, of course, I was devastated. And somebody I knew, actually a business acquaintance, had worked with animal psychic who was also could do long-distance energy work or healing. And, I really thought this was off the wall, but I figured, what do I have to lose? So I called her, she's still working. Her name is Alicia Evans. And, she was in Colorado. I was in New York. And so she spent some time supposedly connecting with Brio over the phone. And, I was thinking, she's going to say the doctors are right and there's nothing she can do. But eventually she said that there's nothing wrong with his spine. I'm going to work with him a little on his energy today and a few more times, but your dog is going to be all right. You're going to have your dog back. And she was right. He came to walk normally again and to run, and we had several more years of very active life together. So, and she'd never met him, never met me. This was over a phone. So, something, I had to acknowledge that this was real. She was doing something that I couldn't explain that was happening not by ordinary means.
And I believe that was the same communicator you did kind of a test with. And I love this because you talk about being a journalist and you need multiple sources and you wanted to get some confirmation. And you did an interesting experiment with her.
Yeah, I used my regular vet, Brio's vet, who, interestingly, she's certainly dedicated to Western medicine, but she is and was open to something, the possibility of, alternative approaches. So she agreed to have the psychic, Alicia, connect with the dogs, and there was maybe one cat, but mostly dogs, of some of her clients, and see what she came up with in terms of their medical, physical conditions. So we did this, and Alicia, this was all long distance, and she didn't know anything except, I think, the dog's name or the animal's name, but no information. So, I took notes of what she said, I forget I don't have the names in front of me, but, Puffy has a back condition, or another dog had a stomach condition, something like that. And I think there were about 10 that we did. And then I went back to the vet and said, well, the psychic says such and such about this dog, and about this dog she said X. So we went through all the animals, and for the most part, if not everyone, Alicia got the medical condition right on. I mean, the vet confirmed this, She said there was a stomach condition. Yes, there was. If there was a back condition, yes, there was. So that, it was not a scientific test. I'm not claiming that, but it was certainly another validation that, that something was going on here.
One of the toughest things for someone who has a beloved dog or any animal for that matter is the passing of that animal, the physical passing of that animal. And it's you're losing a family member. Mm-hmm. How did that happen for you and Brio, and how did you deal with that? Because even though you had this extra mode of communication that most of us don't at least take advantage of, it still had to be incredibly painful. How did you deal with it? And I guess, how did Brio deal with it?
Well, of course, it's incredibly difficult. I had finally, his neurological condition had, he was 15 years old and it had progressed. And he was also having sort of seizure-like things. And, I held out as long as I felt his spirit was still there and he was eating and had some quality of life. But eventually became clear that, it was really difficult. And that the time had come. So I was living in the country at the time and called the vet to come over, and I had arranged to have Alicia, the animal psychic, on the phone with me for support. This was obviously just a horrible thing for any animal person to go through, as we know. So I stayed with him the whole day and night before, and was just holding him very tightly when the vet came. And then when he said the injection was going in, I had this amazing experience that I felt this spiraling sensation with Brio. I was sort of one with him, but I felt this like centrifuge going up and out. I felt I was really going with him. And, I just held on tight to his body through this experience. And, eventually I knew that he was somehow no longer in his body. And, I asked Alicia, what was that? She had felt it too, evidently, over the phone. She said that was his energy expanding as it left, the constriction of his body. And apparently that, as I learned later, is not an uncommon experience that other communicators who work with people, losing their animals or as they pass over have similar experiences. but it was so powerful. It really, first of all, convinced me that, I felt his being, I felt his energy, his spirit, and I didn't feel somehow that it had disappeared because it was so strong as it went out, that what Alicia said absolutely rang true to me. And then I continued to talk to her and a couple of the other psychics after he had passed, and the amazing accuracy of the messages that came from him during those days actually in some ways were the greatest gift of this whole experience with him and the communicators, that they were so accurate about what I was doing and what was going on. For example, where I had been and what I was doing, that the communicators couldn't have known. I didn't say anything. That there was no question that Brio spirit had endured, and then somehow that he was and is still with me. I mean, as I said earlier, over the years, I've come to connect and feel that connection on my own much more. But certainly in those early days when I was so emotionally distraught and I wanted his physical presence back, of course, I mean, it was such a gift to really have this knowledge that, he hadn't, his spirit had not died, his consciousness endures. And that, of course, changes one's perspective about all beings, including us. If his consciousness endures, then...
What if someone is, I'm sure we have people out there listening who have lost a beloved dog in their life or other animal. What would you give as advice to them? Is that something where maybe they could reach out via an animal communicator to try to get in contact? What are your thoughts? What are your suggestions?
I absolutely encourage that if people are open to it. If people are scared of it or, just locked down and don't want to believe it, then, I'd wait and, at least, listen yourself and, seek that connection with, the animal you love, and see what happens if you feel that connection still. But I found the communicators a huge help, certainly in the beginning. But I do think that we humans have to be open to it. I mean, for me, the opening came gradually over the years. So that by the time Brio had passed, I was quite open to it, obviously. But I think that many, animal lovers and animal people are open to it. So if you are, or, if you're open enough just to see what happens, then try it. I do encourage people to do some research to find somebody who has a good reputation. Word of mouth is always good if you know somebody who has a communicator that they trust or and like. I do find that different communicators connect in maybe different ways with different animals. So sometimes a little experimentation is good, but I certainly encourage it if you're open to it.
One last thing I have to ask. I mean, to me, the idea of a documentarian, a news producer, somebody, a journalist in your profession, you deal with a lot of people who have seen a lot of things and probably are pretty skeptical and have a pretty hard shell. What has been the reaction from your colleagues? Has it been, I don't believe in this stuff, or has it been, well, I wouldn't tell anybody, but what has been the reaction? Has it been a mix of both? What have your colleagues said?
Yeah, I guess I'd say a mix of both. I really didn't come out about this, even when I was doing the stories for ABC. I didn't really come out as to being sort of a believer. I sort of put it on, well, I'm curious, this is a fun story, and, people will be interested. But I really didn't go public until this book came out. I'm somewhat at a different point in my career, but yeah, there's been pushback, and some people probably think I'm crazy. Others, people, once you do sort of come out, you certainly find other people that you wouldn't have expected are very open to this. And that happened even over the years, when I would sort of feel, well, maybe it's safe to tell this person, that I'd be surprised sometimes that how open some people were that I never would have expected. So, but yeah, I mean, I think, probably lots of people do think I'm crazy, but, I know what my experience was, and I'm not trying to, force people to believe me. But, as I said, I mean, my one hope is that people will really at least consider changing, sort of negative perspectives about animals as being inferior to us and not feeling, thinking beings, because that I know is not true. And I hope that, this book can just do a tiny bit to encourage people to think of animals as our equals and even our teachers.
Well, it's been a great conversation. I would highly recommend for all of the animal lovers out there to check out this book. Now, Elena, I assume this book is available everywhere fine books are sold, correct?
It is, and you can go to the book website too, which is www.souldogbook.com, and you'll see links to buy there, all the major booksellers, or look it up online. So I hope you do.
Well, it has really been a pleasure. Elena Mannes, thank you for joining us today on the Paranormal Podcast.
Well, thank you so much. It's been fun.
We thank Elena for her time, a fascinating discussion of the spiritual life of dogs. And if you're like me, as I said before, if you have a dog, chances are you think there really is something to this. I think it's a fascinating discussion. And we thank Elena again for her time. Hope you will check out my new email newsletter. It costs you absolutely $0. And you can do that by going over to jimharold.com and signing up. And the reason I did that is because we have so many shows in addition to the Paranormal Podcast. We have Campfire, Crime Scene, Soulmate Stories, not to even mention all of our plus shows, plus possible appearances and different things. And we feel like it's so difficult to get the word out because we can't talk about it constantly on the shows. It would turn into a plug fest. And then secondly, on social media, you never know. You could post something, but you never know who sees it, even if they're your friend or if they're your follower. Sometimes these social media networks don't show it unless you pay for an ad. So I just like to make sure that I can get the information right to you. And the easiest way to do that is via email, still in 2019, believe it or not. So if you want to get our email newsletter, which has been relaunched in the last month or so and we're getting great open rates and people are reading it and clicking on the shows and saying, I didn't even know you had that show, or I didn't even know that show was free. And again, the only way you're going to find out about all of these things is to be tuned in via our Herald Happenings newsletter. And it is over at jimharold.com. There's a big banner at the top of the page. You can't miss it. You click, you sign up, and every Sunday we send you out an email. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you next time on the Paranormal Podcast. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and jimharold.com and help us continue our programming. The sponsor messages you hear on the programs are paid endorsements, although we really do like them. For the full disclaimer, go to jimharold.com, and thanks for listening.